In A Song of Ice and Fire, we see a lot of political and military geniuses. People like Roose Bolton, Littlefinger, Robb Stark, the Blackfish, Duran Martell. And then you have Balon Greyjoy, who, in my opinion, is probably the dumbest leader of a major faction or a major kingdom in the series. It's hard for me to think of anyone who's dumber. Cersei might be a little dumber, but it's kind of close. It's a close call on this one. So during Robert's Rebellion, the Greyjoys were neutral up until the very end. When they attempted to invade the Reach unsuccessfully, they got forced back. They accomplished basically nothing, but they were technically on the winning side, so they came out of the rebellion relatively intact. So once Balon became Lord Paramount, or Lord Reaper of Pike, or whatever title you want to give him, he had the brilliant idea of launching a rebellion to declare independence from the Seven Kingdoms 6 years after Robert won. I mean, if they were going to have a rebellion, the Ironborn, I guess, collectively, he wasn't in charge at that point. You'd think a good time to have this rebellion would be when the realm was completely falling apart and the Crown more or less didn't have any ships to spare, nor could Robert really have any to spare. I don't know what realistically either side could have done if he declared himself King of the Iron Isles and seceded during Robert's Rebellion. He could have even joined whatever side was losing to try to keep the Civil War going on as long as possible. Once again, I get that Balon wasn't in charge, but why he would start a civil war and try to secede 6 years after the war was over and Robert had at least somewhat consolidated the Seven Kingdoms doesn't make a great deal of sense to me. Besides that, the Ironborn have always been an outsiders, both religiously and culturally. Literally everybody else in the Seven Kingdoms hates them. So it actually boosted Robert. It was a rallying cry. Getting to fight the Ironborn and beat the crap out of them really helped his legitimacy. So Balon had learned from his mistakes, though. The next time he rebelled, he was going to do it properly. He was going to go about it the right way. So the Second Greyjoy Rebellion took place during the War of Five Kings, wherein Robb Stark stupidly returned Theon to Balon, and that combined with his existing... I think it's open to debate whether or not Balon would have launched the invasion if Theon hadn't been free. I've seen people argue both ways, but Balon decided to take the opportunity to invade the north. Theon said, okay, look, we already have an independence movement that controls two of the Seven Kingdoms. The rest of the realm is kind of falling apart. Why don't we ally ourselves with the Riverlands and the North, because they aren't interested in putting the realm back together. They'll be willing to support our independence, and if we add in our soldiers and our ships, we can sack Lannisport and we can wreck the Westerlands, and maybe we can win this war. And he's like, so that's my plan. And Theon actually had a good plan that probably would have worked. It at least would have worked better than what happened. But Balon's like, no, I want to pay the iron price. I don't want to win this war. I want a LARP. So he's like, we take the iron price. And the iron price is only taken by stupidly invading places and not making strategically sound decisions, because that's just kind of the way that Balon rolls. So they decide to invade the north. Now this is really like not a good idea because the north is huge. It's huge and a lot of it is inland. Like a place like the Stormlands, most of it is pretty close to the coast. Even like Dorne, a lot of it is kind of close to the coast. So if you could kind of control it from the coastal areas in that way. A lot of colonial empires or kind of other, I think it's called a thalassocracy, is where the major ports and like major most important cities are controlled by a naval power, and they're able to quickly move soldiers and ships in between them. So even if their land isn't really contiguous and they don't control the inland, they still monopolize the trade and kind of assert a de facto control over the area. The issue is the only large port in the north that we know of is White Harbor, which is on the other side of the continent. And I wish them luck trying to get all the way around the continent with enough soldiers to invade White Harbor and the powerful Manderley fortifications there. So instead, they decide we're going to invade the north with its strategically useless, unproductive land. Like they invaded a place called the Stony Shore. Really, the Stony Shore? That's the kind of area you want to conquer. And why do they even want to conquer land on the mainland, anyways? I think that's something we overlook. Like, why do they care about controlling it? Because they believe we do not sow. So they pay the iron price. So why would they want to conquer agricultural land? It doesn't make any sense. I guess because they want to turn it into like a slave state that just exports food to the Iron Isles. I don't know what they were going for, but they're trying to conquer a kingdom that doesn't have a lot of large ports, that is massive, and that requires having a large, complicated logistical system to get anywhere inland. And like, just none of this makes any sense. And they had kind of won, though, I guess you could say strategically, by taking Moat Cailin and kind of the main places on the western coast. But like, what was the actual war goal? To take like some crappy land? Like they can't control the north. The population just isn't big enough, and the Ironborn aren't mobile enough. The best they can do is just own some of the coast. But I think they'd be better off if they could maybe take some fortified ports in the Westerlands or the High Garden and just reinforce those by the sea, or just join in the war and just raid the coast and get a whole bunch of money and help out the Stark Tully alliance. But these things would all be logical. Balon doesn't want that. He wants to LARP. And this brings me to what I think is kind of one of the most interesting what ifs of the series. That is something that Theon is endlessly criticized for, but I think was brilliant and basically won them the war. But the advantage was thrown away because Asha and, or I guess Yara and Balon are fucking stupid. So that was the capture of Winterfell. So Theon captured Winterfell with his small commando force and called for reinforcements. Now, something you'll notice about Winterfell is it's in the dead center of the north. So the thing to keep in mind about castles is the idea of a castle isn't to give your opponents something to attack and then your opponents attack your castle until they run out of troops. The purpose of a castle is to project a zone of control. So the thing is, whenever you're invading someone's territory, you can either siege a castle or you can bypass a castle. And if you bypass a castle, that means that your logistical line from wherever, your baggage train, etc., is vulnerable. Because if you were to, I don't know, say invade, just trying to find an example here. If you were to invade from here and instead of crossing up the Twins, you crossed the river and you didn't take the Twins, you would have to be ferrying your supplies across the river here. And then you'd have to be transporting them by cart. And the Freys could just ride out of here anytime they want and burn the supply depots or attack the supply lines or just attack you in the back in general and coordinate with somebody up front. To deal with this, you have to, like I said, either take the castle, siege it, or move your baggage train in such a way, your supplies, that you have to go in a different direction. Like, so let's say they're trying to reinforce the Stony Shore from the Dreadfort. They would normally, I guess, go kind of there. The shortest route between two lines is a straight line. But if Winterfell's controlled, they'd have to go all the way down to avoid it, unless they're willing to siege Winterfell directly. So that's the issue. If you bypass a castle, you'll have a lot of men, generally mounted, who can sally out at any point in time and attack you in the back and disrupt your supplies. So you kind of have to take the castles, but castles are obviously very hard to take. And Winterfell, I forget if it has double or triple walls. It's one of the largest, most heavily fortified castles in all of Westeros. And when you have a castle, you have a massive advantage as the defender. A huge advantage, and Winterfell is one of the largest and best defended castles. So basic logic would suggest that Theon took it. He now controls a huge fortress in the exact center of the north. If he was to garrison Winterfell with a couple hundred people, preferably a couple hundred horsemen. I get that the Ironborn don't use cavalry, but they could use dragoons. They could have Ironborn who ride horses in this dismount and fight. Then they could project a huge zone of control around here. And any northern army that's trying to move from the eastern part of the north to the western part of the north would have to either go way around, or they'd be completely vulnerable to being attacked, to having raids, to having their supply lines destroyed and burned. Also, I would assume Winterfell is the main place that would supply armies from all across the north, just because, like I said, it's in the center and it has a huge granary. And it's not like they'd even need to send a big army there, because Winterfell has its own grain supply. You have the glass garden. It produces its own food. You probably only need a couple hundred people there, and they could hold out against a much larger army. Once again, Winterfell's kind of just out there, and a sieging army would have to bring food in, like, to the middle of the north, which is huge, and it would just be very difficult. And I'd imagine getting siege weapons built, making them big enough to attack Winterfell, it would be a logistical disaster. So by taking Winterfell, I think Theon more or less won the war for them. It was 100% total strategic victory. But they go, no, we shouldn't take Winterfell. Theon, we need to retreat. You know what it really kind of reminds me of is what happened on the Eastern Front in World War II. Because Hitler's plan was, we're going to attack the Caucasus, we're going to take the Ukraine, and we're going to take the Caucasus, and that's, even if we can't get the oil or food out of the Ukraine and the Caucasus, it'll deny the Soviet army access to both of them, and they'll starve and they won't have the gasoline necessary to move their tanks. So we need to invade there and capture that to strategically win the war. And then, particularly near the end, the German general staff was like, no, we need to withdraw to shorten our lines and then counterattack. That's how you win a war, by giving up territory, including the most important territory in Russia, like the Ukraine and some of the pathways to the Caucasus, and then counterattack. That's how you win the war. Theon capturing the enemy's capital in an extremely important strategic position and holding it to basically ensure that we will maintain perpetual control of the western north isn't the way to win a war. You win a war by withdrawing to tiny little fortified settlements on the west coast and then trying to seek a peace treaty from a position of weakness. That's how you win a war. Like, Madman Theon thought that taking the enemy's capital and their food supplies and the massive loss of prestige was important to winning the war. No, Yara was right and Balon was right, and Theon was stupid. Theon didn't get it. Like, you don't win wars that way. And it's just, obviously I'm being sarcastic, but it's so dumb. It's such a missed opportunity. It was the only chance of Balon's big-brained idea actually working, and he just refused to take advantage of it and to act on it. So, yeah, the whole thing was just kind of a disaster, but everything the Ironborn do is always a disaster because they're stupid evil. That's their alignment. They're always chaotic evil, and they're always moronic. Anyways, guys, I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll talk to you